Dear Beatrice, it is rumored that within the Maslow's hierarchy of needs for the ultra-wealthy, somewhere between self-actualization and paying for your children's private tennis lessons, there lies a grander vision of what wealth can achieve: the construction of utopian cities. There have been many people over the years who, dissatisfied with their urban living arrangements, so full of inconvenient reminders of inequality and human suffering, have thought to themselves, I could do a better job of this. After an outbreak of the bubonic plague, for instance, Leonardo da Vinci famously turned his genius to the designing of an ideal city, which is now part of the Codex Atlanticus. Remarkably, his design, incorporating spaced-out apartment buildings and drainage canals to remove waste, is quite similar to that of Venice, Italy, if only the poor, the sick, and the starving had been removed. Then, of course, there's Walt Disney and his Epcot nightmare fuel, which, had it been constructed, would have at best served as a kind of voluntary internment camp for Disney adults, and at worst created an authoritarian micronation just outside of Orlando, Florida. Comme ci, comme ça. And I suppose you could also throw Calvino into the mix of urban idealists. I like his Pinecone City idea. The point is, the idea of a utopian city is far from unique. One of the most recent such endeavors has come out of Solano County, California. Dubbed California Forever, the billionaire-backed project intends to construct a beautifully concept-arted city with a capacity for over 50,000 residents. The project was officially announced in August of 2023, but the California Forever organization, formerly known as the mysterious Flannery Associates Corporation, had already spent 6 years and over $800 million secretly buying up land around the Travis Air Force Base. This covert operation, the motivations of which heretofore were unknown, aroused not just local suspicions, but also an FBI investigation. Turns out, though, it wasn't China or Bill Gates trying to hoard American farmland, but a Mr. Jan Sramek trying to put together a city. A crystalline blue and green glass globe of a city, dropped in Central California, ensconced in silicon. And if you read the promotional material on the California Forever's website, it all looks great. Only trouble is, not many people in Solano County agree. There is much well-founded concern that the city would disrupt sustainable agricultural practices and make the region prohibitively expensive for its mostly low-income residents. This is all to say that however well-intentioned or otherwise California Forever may be, it fits into an all-too-familiar historical pattern of misguided philanthropic idealism and represents a startling misunderstanding of what a city even is. So let's start there, shall we? What is it that Da Vinci and Disney and Sramek all got wrong? For one thing, they failed to realize that cities are not meant to be designed by one person. A pre-built structure vast enough to neatly fit the lives of 50,000 people or more is, simply put, a ridiculous fantasy. No, a city is an essentially community-oriented construction. The whole concept of land development as it exists in the US today is a relatively new concept. Before development, there was settlement, which, apart from being less expensive and much, much more violent, was also a more individualized piecemeal process. You know, throughout history, most cities and towns sprung up not because a corporation wanted it to, but because of natural shared incentives for people to live near one another. Many of the greatest cities in the world, like Rome, Paris, London, New York, etc., were not conceived of by one person, nor, of course, could they ever have been. They began simply as a military outpost, convenient trading center, or small colony, and each successive evolution or expansion they underwent was a natural byproduct of history and the lives of the people who lived through it. In other words, it is history, more than anything else, that make these utopian visions ring hollow. Luckily for you, dear Beatrice, I'm no ordinary wannabe city planner. My talents are much more in retrospect than in any kind of visionary foresight. And I think to design a city worthy of the future, that's just what we need. In the beginning, there was nothing. Well, not nothing, of course. There were actually a whole bunch of well-established Native American tribes. But then, the British Empire is here, and they built up this fort near Lake Erie. Isn't that lovely? Well, don't get too attached, because in just a historical blink of an eye, an American Revolution has seized it, and a British warship has 1812'd it to its fiery end. That was Fort Wisteria, built upon Wisteria Hill. Fast forward a bit more, and Wisteria Hill is the central vantage point for a small town, which makes use of easy lake access to participate in a growing shipping trade that connects New York to the Great Lakes via the Erie Canal, and then the Great Lakes to New Orleans via the Mississippi. And now, atop Wisteria Hill, the impressive old brownstone known for miles around as simply the Elderberry Building, as that was the burgeoning town's name. And then, towards the latter half of that breathless and unflinching century, there is yet another reinvention of the area, as Elderberry is transformed into an industrial hub of some note, home to the fifth largest Carnegie steel mill and later a major headquarters for Cadillac. In 1923, the Elderberry Building burns down in an apparent shirtwaist-esque accident, and is replaced a few years later with a bright and shiny modern shopping mall. If you know anything about the last century of American urbanism, and I know for a fact that you do, you won't be surprised with what comes next. 1944, GI Bill, incipit redlining, white flight, the beginning of Levittounian suburbanization. 1956, Interstate Highway 90 cuts through downtown, almost destroying Wisteria Hill forever, if not for a grassroots movement of upper-class white people that managed to divert the freeway through a culturally significant minority neighborhood instead. Suburban expansion continues through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, with vast tracts of cul-de-saced homes springing up farther and farther away from the now decaying and crime-infested downtown. 2008, Cadillac shuts down their main Elderberry headquarters, and in 2013, the shopping mall on Wisteria Hill is shuttered as well and left abandoned. None of this is actually true, of course. Elderberry is not a real city, and there is no Wisteria Hill, but the historical trends that shaped this imaginary city have had very real impacts on many American cities, particularly in the Rust Belt and the Midwest. I could have told very similar stories about Cleveland or Detroit, Cincinnati or Pittsburgh, etc. Irregardless, this is the kind of history that Jan Ceramic and company would probably prefer to escape. And honestly, can you blame him? Wouldn't it be much easier to avoid all the painful histories of displacement, exploitation, demographic shifts, and start from scratch with, I don't know, a few $1 billion? Now, if you want to create good urban environments, if you want to achieve the dreams that California Forever claims to pursue, equitable and affordable housing, diverse, thriving communities, safe, walkable, and green public spaces, climate readiness, etc., you have to start with a real city. You can't make them up out of thin air. Which brings me back to Elderberry, my very own not real city, and the oh so exciting topic of activism. Politically speaking, initiatives to improve cities will always have the advantage of being practical and, if correctly implemented, broadly popular, but also the disadvantage of being expensive and not having "Save the Children" as its political slogan. It's a long, boring process, but the results could not be more impactful. Luckily, for the purposes of my research and also for the length of this dispatch, there are plenty of mostly upper middle class white men like myself, progressive wannabe urbanists, all of us, who make videos about good urbanism here on YouTube. In my research for this, I fell all the way down the rabbit hole, learning about the 15-minute cities philosophy, how to build out bike lane networks, how to revitalize American cities, much like Elderberry, and so on. The best part? The philosophies and policies that this little corner of the internet preaches is not some Buckminster Fuller nonsense. It's really happening in real places across the country. Now, I could have very easily made this entire video about the implementation of good urbanism strategies, but I did include the story of Jan Ceramic and California Forever for a reason, and that is that I can't help but root for it. It's a dire confession, I know, so listen closely. Despite the unethical and secretive business practices, despite the fact that it will almost definitely, in my view, end up being an unfinished, unequal dumpster fire, I really would love nothing more if, for once, the Billionaires managed to pull off something really cool. I think that's because the idea of what they're trying to do here with California Forever touches something near and dear to my excitable creativity. For as long as I can remember, I've been an amateur city planner. More corny words have never been spoken, I know. When I was in elementary school, I was obsessed with SimCity, where I'm ashamed to admit I opted for the cheaper coal power plants over renewables. And in middle school, I drew up all kinds of maps, such as these, inspired by a bunch of different videos and documentaries I watched about cities. The idea of a city is a grand one indeed. A monument to life, to beauty, tradition, innovation, to all of humanity, wrapped up into one semi-cohesive form. What could be more meaningful than the construction of the perfect city? It's an intoxicating notion, which as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, has ensnared many notable people. If I could talk to Mr. Sramic, I would tell him that I understand where he's coming from. It's a fantastic idea. Believe me when I say I would genuinely not mind taking a crack at it myself. But I also know that it would not work. If it were my billions of dollars, I would not spend it taking holdout farmers to court to try to steal their land. I'm not sure how to end this story. I'm not sure exactly what kind of story I've ended up telling when you come right down to it. But I suppose Calvino is as good a stopping place as any. Quote, "In the center of Fedora, that gray stone metropolis, stands a metal building with a crystal globe in every room. Looking into each globe, you see a blue city, the model of a different Fedora. These are the forms the city could have taken if, for one reason or another, it had not become what we see today. In every age, someone, looking at Fedora as it was, imagined a way of making it the ideal city. But while he constructed his miniature model, Fedora was already no longer the same as before, and what had been, until yesterday, a possible future, became only a toy in a glass globe." Sincerely,